way, too, to help figure out what it means is to look up the reference. That is, the idea is coming from somewhere else. If you look at this handout, the first quote, that references the city, the idea of the city on a hill. This little handout here. And these are, you've heard of Jesus? Okay, who is Jesus?
Jesus Christ.
Okay, who is he?
Jew.
Yes, a Jew. Okay, what else about it besides being a Jew? Well, his country is governed, it's being ruled by the Romans at this time, who of course have an emperor. The Jews always find themselves governed by somebody else. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Romans, whoever it is, the Germans, it's always somebody. So he's a Jew that's being governed by another country, by Rome, being part of an empire. What else do we know about Jesus? He helped poor people. He was what's called a rabbi, which is a teacher. A religious teacher, but a teacher. And in Christian belief, he's the Son of God. Okay? So one of the things that he says is this first quote. You are the light of the world.
You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven.
So this is basically where the idea comes from. John Winthrop didn't make this up. He's getting this from the Bible. He's borrowing it. And that's what Ronald Reagan is borrowing from John Winthrop, who's borrowing from Jesus, right? Obama is borrowing from Ronald Reagan, who's borrowing from John Winthrop, who's borrowing from Jesus. And that is, you'll see all these, that's basically all these references that are going through this. Okay, what is the city on a hill? Because he compares it to this. Basically, to understand what the city on a hill, he says, what would you do if you have a lamp, right? You have a lamp. Do you put it under a basket or on a stand so it gives light to the whole house? So it's trying to understand the idea of a city on a hill by comparing it to a lamp. So the idea is that this city on a hill is going to give light to everybody. How is it going to give light? Because it's going to, this passage about the city on a hill and the light, it is attached to what you see below here, to give it more context, is what are called the Beatitudes. And it really embodies what you guys were saying, many of you were saying about what the new society would look like. These are basically, if you want to know what Christianity is supposed to be in a nutshell, it's these 9 lines. That is the core and the heart of it.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall
Inherit. The meek. So the meek are those who are timid, who are like those of you who are shy. You can say you're meek. You're not very loud. You don't try to make your presence known. You're meek. You're timid. Okay. Danny?
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness.
Righteousness, which means for doing good, for justice.
For they shall be satisfied.
Good.
Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy.
Merciful. Do you know what that means, Vivian? Merciful? That means, like for example, if you do something bad to me, I won't try to hurt you in return. I will show you mercy.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
And then I'll do the last one. Blessed are the peacemakers. Peacemakers, the people who make peace between people, for they shall be called sons of God. So you have a few of the ideas. Mercy, right? Not to, instead of harming people who harm you, to show them kindness. Pure in heart, Blessed are those who mourn, the people who are suffering, because they will be comforted. Instead of saying blessed are the powerful or the rulers, it's the people who are timid. Blessed are those who hunger for what is good. So that's basically where this is all coming from. And you can see maybe how John Winthrop, the kind of society that he wants, is having all of these virtues. Instead of having a king, we have a covenant, we have an agreement with each other to try to follow some of these. And then we will be like that lamp that's up on a stand. That's hope for everybody else. So does anybody have any idea, and we're starting informally before this, why I might have chosen Ronald Reagan? I mean, aside from the fact that he uses the City on a Hill reference, but I started with the speech, not with the City on a Hill reference. So I went back to John Winthrop to explain the Ronald Reagan speech. He was just a very good orator. He gave an orator as a person who can deliver a speech. He was very, very good, and he captures in this speech the idea of America as an idea, not a place, but an idea, by referring to all these things. So this speech is given in 1980, and the United States had gone through a pretty bad decade, the 1970s, which was when I was born. I was actually born during the biggest crisis in probably American history, which was the Watergate Scandal. The Watergate Scandal was basically when President Nixon, his party, the Republican Party, wiretapped. So the Republican Party wiretapped the Democrats to find out what they were doing before an election. So this, of course, goes against all the rules. And so when President Nixon admitted to this, he was impeached, which is the first time this ever happened in American history. He was thrown out of his office, so he could no longer be president. That had never happened before. It created a big crisis. And what else happened in the 1970s? So you've heard of the Vietnam War?
Yes.
Everybody's heard of the Vietnam War. Did the Americans win or lose that? We lost that war. And it went on forever and ever. And the wars were different then, because now the United States pays other people to be their soldiers. They're called mercenaries. So most of the people in Afghanistan and most of the people in Iraq are paid soldiers. And back then it was called a draft. So that would mean that you get a letter in the mail saying you have to go to war. So there were a lot of protests in the 1970s. So that was lost. Then, like I said, the Watergate Scandal, that was when they found out that Nixon had tapped the Democrats. In addition to that, you've heard of the Soviet Union, right? It doesn't exist anymore. It's just Russia. But the Soviet Union was the big communist state, and it was a big enemy of the United States. And they started to win things. They invaded Afghanistan. Communism was spreading in many countries, like Ethiopia. And what else? Something called stagflation. For those of you who study economy, stagflation. It's like when things get very expensive, but you don't make more money. What happens also is gasoline prices go up because of the problems in the Middle East, and so people are waiting on lines to get gas. And then finally, the country that was called Persia in the Middle East, it became Iran or Iran. And they had a revolution, and they took over the American embassy, and there were hundreds and hundreds of hostages that were taken. So there was a crisis, basically. People were really freaked out that all the good years were behind them, and that what was coming in the future was just bad. And so the president at the time was a man named Jimmy Carter. So this is the president in 1979, 1980, and Ronald Reagan is running against them. And so this is the speech that Ronald Reagan gives the day before the election, which he ends up winning with 46 out of 50 states. So he wins, and part of it is his ability to give really good speeches, because his politics were kind of drastic. They were very radical for most people. They were very, very, very conservative, much more than Americans had become. Ronald Reagan was a very religious man too. And the country had become less religious. So we're going to look at how he uses many of these ideas, like of a covenant and a city upon a hill and all these virtues of mercy and whatnot, to understand what America is 370 years later. So we're going to start with this. We're not doing the whole speech, we're just doing little passages from it.
That's why I want to talk with you not about campaign issues, but about America. About us, you and me. Not so long ago, we emerged from a world war. Turning homeward at last, we built a grand prosperity and hoped from our own success and plenty to help others less fortunate. Our peace was a tense and bitter one, but in those days, the center seemed to hold. Then came the hard years, riots and assassinations, domestic strife over the Vietnam War, and in the last 4 years, drift and disaster in Washington. It all seems a long way from a time when politics was a national passion and sometimes even fun. A popular novel of the 60s ended prophetically with its description of a kindly, pleasant, greening land about to learn whether history still had a place for a nation so strangely composed of great ideals and uneasy compromise as she. Well, that's really the question before us tonight. For the first time in our memory, many Americans are asking, does history still have a place for America, for her people, for her great ideals? There are some who answer no, that our energy is spent, our days of greatness at an end, that a great national malaise is upon us. They say we must cut our expectations, conserve and withdraw, that we must tell our children not to dream as we once dreamed.
So Reagan is addressing all the things that I said, all of these problems that are going on, right? What is his response to that? So, saying all these horrible things have happened, right? So does that mean that it's over? That the good years are over? That nothing good is happening in the future? Is the dream over? And what do you think he's going to say? No. Why? So let's see why he says it's not over. Why is it not over?
But I wonder if those who doubt America have forgotten that just as in the lives of individuals, so too in the lives of nations, it is always when things seem most unbearable that we must have faith that America's trials have meaning beyond our understanding. Since her beginning, America has held fast to this hope of divine providence, this vision of man with God. It is true that world peace is jeopardized by those who view man not as a noble being, but as an accident of nature, without soul, and important only to the extent that he can serve an all-powerful state. But it is our spiritual commitment, more than all the military might in the world, that will win our struggle for peace. It is not bombs and rockets, but belief and resolve. It is humility before God that is ultimately the source of America's strength as a nation. Our people always have held fast to this belief, this vision, since our first days as a nation.
Okay, perfect. So there's a lot of concepts that he brings up, and I've written some divine providence. When he said, when things become most unbearable, that we have faith that America's trials, that there's a reason beyond our understanding. And he talks about divine providence. America has a divine providence. What does that mean? Okay, let's break that up. What does divine mean? Anybody?
Define.
Divine. Not define, but divine. Yes, Coco. Yes. It means of or related to God. Divine. And how about providence? Divine providence. Providence. What is that? Do you know what destiny is?
Yes.
What is that, Danny?
About your life.
What about your life?
What happened?
Does it mean that what happens in your life, it just happens, like I go outside, I get hit by a car, there's no reason for it? Or does it mean that there was a reason for me getting hit by a car?
There's a reason.
Yeah, exactly. So destiny is that there's a reason, that there's going to be, and a providence is that God is in charge of what's happening. And what he then says is, the other people say that humans they don't have a soul, they don't have a spirit, they're an accident of nature. So, an accident of nature. What does that mean, you think? To be an accident of nature. So the idea of the accident of nature is basically people who don't believe in God, who believe that this happened just through evolution. We got here through evolution and nothing else. Nothing else. This is all kind of random. You know, they say how life came to being, how life started. A bunch of chemicals in the ocean in a soup, and then somehow a cell happened. Right? It's just an accident. And he's saying, those people who believe that humans are just an accident, those are the ones who create bad governments. And he's really thinking of the Soviet Union here when he says this. But so he believes, we believe in that God is working in our lives. We have a commitment. Remember the whole covenant. It's the same thing, spiritual commitment. We have a covenant as a people. So he's bringing all this stuff back up that we talked about. This doesn't happen in Europe. Okay? The Prime Minister of England never talks about things like divine providence. The President of France will never talk about divine providence or spiritual commitment. Right? The Italian Prime Minister, it just doesn't happen. This is a very American thing, is to talk about religion in a political context. All right, let's keep going in this because we're going to get to our little section of the city upon a hill.
No reasonable man who sees the world as it is, who views the deterioration of our economy, the waning of our relationships with our allies, the growth of Soviet might, and the sufferings of our recent past, could underestimate the difficulties before us. But I wonder if those who doubt America have forgotten that just as in the lives of individuals, so too in the lives of nations, it is always when things seem most unbearable that we must have faith that America's trials have meaning beyond our understanding. Since her beginning, America has held fast to this hope of divine providence, this vision of man with God. It is true that world peace is jeopardized by those who view man not as a noble being, but as an accident of nature, without soul, and important only to the extent that he can serve an all-powerful state. But it is our spiritual commitment, more than all the military might in the world, that will win our struggle for peace. It is not bombs and rockets, but belief and resolve. It is humility before God that is ultimately the source of America's strength as a nation. Our people always have held fast to this belief, this vision, since our first days as a nation. I know I've told before of the moment in 1630 when the tiny ship Arabella, bearing settlers to the New World, lay off the Massachusetts coast. To the little band of settlers gathered on the Jack, John Winthrop said, "We shall be a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world." Well, America became more than a story or a byword, more than a sterile footnote in history. I have quoted John Winthrop's words more than once on the campaign trail this year, for I believe that Americans in 1980 are every bit as committed to that vision of a shining city on a hill as were those long ago settlers.
Okay, so there we go. We have again John Winthrop and the city upon a hill. How do you think Reagan is using this, what John Winthrop said about a city on a hill? What do you think he's saying? It's 1980. How is America at this point a city on a hill?
they are the strongest country of the world.
Okay, so he mentions that about military might, he says. And he says it's not about military might. Yes, it is the most powerful military, but how is it different from the Soviet Union at the time, or from China, or from these other countries? How is it different? Which one of these things that I wrote down? Yeah. In fact, all of those, really, is to say the spiritual commitment, humility before God, divine providence, not the acts of nation, but divine providence. So instead of he's saying it's not about this country, we have all these problems. Our strength is not in the military that we have or in other people being afraid of us, but it's in certain values that go back to the Puritans. And he's saying, people, you may be, at this point, it's like the trials, meaning the difficulties, the people that don't have enough money anymore, they're waiting on line for gas, they're worried that the government may not be able to protect them anymore, like those hostages in Iran. Even though you may have all these fears, don't worry, because we have very good values that will keep us safe. Which is, again, like I said, this if you want to like have a conversation with people when you go to the United States, this is like very different than than any other country really that has this idea, this very religious notion of politics. So, do you think, how is he going to say after this that the United States can be a city on a hill? What's it going to do? Let's see how these ideas, how these principles that go back to the Puritans, how they're going to still...
During this last year, I've had a chance to meet and talk on the campaign trail with Americans in every corner of the United States. I find no national malaise. I find nothing wrong with the American people. Oh, they're frustrated, even angry at what has been done to this blessed land. But more than anything, they're sturdy and robust as they've always been. Any nation that sees softness in our prosperity or disunity in our sometimes noisy arguments with each other, let such nations not make the mistake others have made. Let them understand that we will put aside in a moment the fruits of our prosperity and the luxury of our disagreements if the cause is a safe and peaceful future for our children. Let it always be clear that we have no dreams of empire, that we seek no manifest destiny, that we understand the limitations of any one nation's power. But let it also be clear that we do not shirk history's call, that America is not turned inward, but outward toward others. Let it be clear that we have not lessened our commitment to peace, or to the hope that someday all of the peoples of the world will enjoy lives of decency, lives with a degree of freedom, with a measure of dignity. Together, tonight, let us say what so many long to hear, that America is still united, still strong, still compassionate, still clinging fast to the dream of peace and freedom, still willing to stand by those who are persecuted or alone, for those who seek the right to self-determination without interference from foreign powers. Tonight, let us speak to them, for those who suffer from social or religious discrimination, for those who are victims of police states or government-induced torture or terror, for those who are persecuted, for all the countries and people of the world who seek only to live in harmony with each other. Tonight, let us speak for them. And to our allies, who regard us with such constant puzzlement and profound affection, we must also speak tonight. To our Canadian neighbors who so recently rescued Americans in Tehran, to the people of Great Britain, to whom ties of blood, language, and culture bind so closely, to the people of France, who midwifed our birth as a nation, to the people of Germany and Japan with whom we bound up the wounds of war, to the people of Ireland and Italy, and all the ethnic communities whose national heritages have enriched this nation and become our own, to the people of Israel, with whom we enjoy the closest of friendships, to the people of Latin America, Australia, the Philippines, Taiwan, Korea, to all our allies, great and small, we say tonight, at last, the sleeping giant stirs and is filled with a resolve.